In this video, we're going to add one new piece of functionality to this project. I guess I should say one more because we've already added quite a bit, but we're ready for this. This is merely meant to be a tool that we can use to perform a cool piece of functionality in our project. You're mostly just going to kind of copy and paste it, or copy it down, because I'm not going to give you this directly. So use this tutorial to learn how to do it and copy the code over, and you're going to implement it in your own location with your own strategy. But here's the core idea. We're going to be creating a timer that will asynchronously run data in what we call a multi-threaded process. What that means in layman's terms is, so far in our software, when we have things happening, let's say I have a message printout, message 1, and then I have message 2, and I run my program, I will see that they run message 1, then message 2, and my program ends. However, what if I wanted to have a program that had information run, not immediately, but on a delay? And then more than that, not just on a delay, but scheduled so that it will happen again and again and again on that delay, to allow there to be kind of an autonomous process running on a timed schedule that we can kind of have working for us to perform things for us in an automated fashion. So I'm going to teach you a strategy. There's a number of different ways we could do this, but I think this one is kind of a nice way to be able to work with this stuff. And so what I'm going to do in this timer testing class that I've made is, well, first of all, show you that I made a separate class for this. I also have brought over my file writer from the last unit. I'll take a peek at it. It has this utility method because I want to be able to write files in this section, and I might as well reuse code that I've written before to save some time. And we're going to see this in this tutorial a little bit later on in it. But the first thing that I need to do inside of this file is to make a reference to a timer. I'm going to make a timer that I'm going to call timer. And of course, I need to import this. We want java.util.timer to be imported to access this timer. And I want this to be accessible in the entire class because I need to be able to start the timer in one method, but stop the timer in another. So I'm just going to make these names. I'm going to go private void start timer, create the method outline for this, and private void stop timer. And the stopping is really simple. I'm taking my timer and I'm going to cancel it. The timer is going to get canceled if this ever gets run. But the starting of the timer is just a little bit more complicated. And to be able to do this, well, I'll show you. I'm going to set the timer to be a new timer. I'm going to instantiate this timer. And then I need to do something called a schedule. And you'll see in the scheduler, I need something called a timer task. And here's where things get a little bit new and unusual. I'm going to write some code here and then explain what's going on after I've written it. In this new timer task, I'm actually going to be creating a new timer task object and instantiating it in this slot. I need to import the timer task class, but this new timer task needs to have some customized information. So I'm actually going to do something that'll look odd for a sec here and hit enter a couple times and add some space down below this and add a squiggly brace. It's going to error for now, but what I'm doing here is creating a new form of this class right here inside of a method call. To help communicate Java what I'm doing, I'm going to write this @override information, and I'm going to actually make a method within a method. Okay, so now it's kind of stopped complaining. The last thing that I need to do here is down below where I have kind of the end of this method call, I created a timer. I need to have kind of initial time when it for how it begins, and this comma needs to be here, and then I need a final time for how long it's going to wait in between calls. This is in milliseconds, so 1,000 of them would be 1 second. And notice how Java accepts this as a totally logical piece of information. If you want to research this a little bit more, if you're curious, it's called an anonymous class. But the basic idea here, I'll try to explain it one time really briefly, is I'm instantiating a new timer task but without giving it a name. Like we normally give our instantiated objects names based off of the type, but here, because it's only going to be a local thing that just runs and lives here and then kind of isn't needed anywhere else, I can skip over that step because I don't need a reference to it. I just want it to happen once. But inside of this instantiated class, I have a method called run. That is what our timer is looking for to trigger again and again and again. But the basic run timer doesn't know what to do, so I need to override it and replace it with new functionality. And inside of this overridden version, I need to actually run some functionality. So what is that going to be? Well, we're going to call it in this section here, I'm going to call it a scrape all data. I'm going to have another method that I want to have called over and over. And so I'm going to put this method inside of that run command. So now when the timer triggers the actual run behavior, it will trigger this specific content inside of the overridden run method in this timer task method that I've now created a local anonymous class. All that said, if you're someone that wants to go on to study more computer science in the future, you might find it really useful and interesting to research this a little bit further, do a Google search, read some forums, read some tutorials, but it's definitely beyond the scope of this course to create them on our own in a custom way. So if you're just taking this course out of curiosity or you're not sure to continue, just copy this down and work with it. I actually like to back this up so that it looks kind of on the same line here. I think that would look the best for our organization. And now we've set up our timer. I can improve it in one more way, which is to allow there to be a custom time. So timer length, I'm going to take this variable and I'm going to have the timer length be placed here. Although, actually, maybe let's call this something different. Let's call this, just to be really clear for this tutorial, time milliseconds. This is how long it's going to wait between triggering the behavior. Remembering that's in milliseconds. And so with this all built here, I now have the ability for the timer to be started and created, but also to be stopped and canceled if I ever want to stop it running. So in my constructor that I'm going to run if I open this program, what's going to happen here? Well, let's have something happen. I'm going to say this is working whenever this method is called. It should be called once every however much time I put in here. So let's just put in our constructor, start timer, and I'm going to put in 1,000. 1,000 milliseconds is a second. And let's run this and see what happens. Notice how this is working now, prints out every second. And this is going to continue to happen, well, endlessly, because I have this chained in a loop. Because I've set this timer to schedule an event every second, which is basically the same thing as saying that it's kind of just looping this behavior over and over again. And if I ever wanted to stop, I'll have to actually call the stop timer method by probably having a menu that allows me to choose to start and stop whenever I want to. You can test that piece out for yourself. However, I want to show you something else that's going on here. What if I was to say while true? I'm just going to make a really generic while loop that I can break out of if I want to break out of, but I'm just going to let it loop forever right here. I'm going to say enter some data, and then I'm going to get my data from my scanner. Let's get another line pulled in here, and then I'm going to print out you typed in, and then I'm going to concatenate to it the data at the end. So let's run this and see how this goes. It's going to tell me, once it kind of pops up here, enter some data, and this is working, is going to loop. So we need to make sense of how is this all interacting with each other. If I start typing in some stuff, notice how our console here kind of gets a little bit finicky. It disappeared, but if I type in another letter, it reappears. So it's there, it's just kind of getting cut off. This multi-threading asynchronous stuff is a little bit clunky in a console. It'll work a lot better once we get to a better user interface later. But for now, if I press enter, it keeps in mind everything that I typed in. The this is workings don't get in the way of the other processing. They're happening independently of one another, and it's just kind of getting muddled up in this interface. What this means is I can have tasks being performed again and again in the background while I do other things like work through a menu or view information. I can have some tasks going on in the background in a repeated way. This task just happens to print out data, so I see it in the console. But what if I didn't print out data? What if I just kind of like added up some information and wanted to be able to see info about that information? So what if we, well, let me think for a sec here. What if we did something like this? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create another variable in this class, private int. I'm just going to call it num here. I'll set it to 0 to begin this, just to be really clear. And what I want to have happen is instead of print out this is working, I want the num to increase every time the scheduled method is called. And then what I'm going to do is when that user enters some data, instead of saying what I typed in for the data, I'm going to say the num is currently num. Now when I run this, it kind of looks like nothing's happening because there's nothing on the screen, but behind the scenes, this is being triggered. And if I type in something The num is currently 7. If I wait a little bit, the num is 9. If I type it in a bunch of times fast, it hasn't had enough time to update num yet, so I might see it a bunch of times in a row, but now that I've waited a while, it's 17. This is now keeping track of how many seconds have elapsed in the program. Not exactly. It's not perfect. If you want to know why, you can ask me privately, but there is a very real behind-the-scenes set of functionality that's not interfering with my program. It's happening asynchronously. I can just work in here, type in stuff, interact with a menu, do all the things I'm used to doing, typing everything with bad grammar, while things are being kept track of asynchronously. So now we've got the ability to kind of separate functionality like that. And what I want us to do with this is, well, let's not run with the numbers here. Let's get rid of this, and let's not print this out anymore. But the idea here is that once we set up all of our scraping, what if we want to do something that's a bit more set it and forget it? Meaning that we are able to just run this behavior, start the timer, and then every minute, every hour, every day, as long as we have our program running, it's going to grab new up-to-date information. So what if I want to keep track of some stock prices? I want to know every minute or two what the new prices are. Instead of going back every minute and pressing refresh, pressing a menu button, I can just have it automatically queue up a certain interval of time between each time those things are called. To see this in action, let's take a look at some file outputting for a minute. So I'm going to create some functionality here that connects to a file and prints out some information. How about time? So I'm going to create some stuff that has to do with time. I'm going to use a private class, an object here. I'm going to call date. I'm going to import this. Not data, date. I keep on mixing those words up. This utility called date. And down here, why is this mad at me now? Did I change something? Let's see why this is angry. Oh, did I accidentally unimport the timer task? Oh, I did. Oops, I deleted the import for the timer task somewhere along the way. Easy, strange mistake to make. But now it's back up and running. And so what I want to do down here with my date is I'm going to have this, well, I'm going to instantiate it up here as a new date type object. And to use this, I was actually going to print out some information in kind of a strange format. I can go date, and I can get, let's take a look here for what time I want to get. Let's just get the time, and we'll see what this looks like when we print this out on our timer here. It prints it out in time that's elapsed since some kind of beginning of an epoch. It's weird information that's not super relevant to making sense to the human reader. It does keep track of time for the purposes of some types of code, but we want this in a different format. So I'll introduce you to another class in Java called the simple date format class. We should call it formatter, and what we're going to do is provide a format we want the date to be printed out. And this interfaces with this date class really nicely. This is just something that you learn kind of experience how to use by reading the API about this stuff, but I'm going to import the simple date format. I want it to be day, month, year, and I want it to have hours, minutes, and seconds reported on it. Kind of a cool way of processing strings. If you're ever curious, you can look at the documentation for that class and see a bit more information about how they do this. But actually, what I'm going to do here is I'm simply just going to print out what happens when my formatter formats the information it receives from this date object that's getting the current date. So if I run this in my program, I'll see that it now prints out an updated date and time that is not incrementing in the seconds for some reason here, but it's meant to print the date and time out if it was working properly. I wonder why. Oh, it's because I'm not creating a new date. It's locked in time. So I need to be instantiating, Mr. L, need to remember how to use this. Should have practiced a bit more before. I'm going to reset this date object each time so that it's gathering new data each time this runs. And now I will see up-to-date information. Perfect, so that's good to kind of know. It needs to be reinstantiated to gather the new information from the system. So now that I'm pulling this information into my program, rather than just simply printing it out, I'm instead gonna put this to some text, my date text in a string. And next, what I'm going to do here in my program is I'm going to also instantiate an object for my file write. I'm going to call it a writer. It's a new file write object. And extra thing there. And now I have access to my writer, like I did in the last project, and I can write contents to file with a file name, some string, and I want to append data. I want this file to be called maybe output.txt, and I want this date text to be written to it. I think everything's built here. This doesn't take too long to set up once you know what you're doing. I'll leave the code kind of on the screen here. And so what's happening in my program? Well, apparently nothing. It's waiting for me to enter data. If I do, right, it just kind of waits for more data. So what's really going on here? Well, if I take a look at my folder, so I'm going to go properties, find the root folder that I'm working in Java here. And actually, I'm already in mine here. I see this output file has now appeared. And once I open it, I should see that it's had data entered to it, which is all these different timestamps. Every second this has been running, it's added an entry to it. Now it's kind of paused because I have the file open, but once I close, it's actually still writing to it. I'm just not getting updated information. If I close it and open it again, I will see that in the meantime, a bunch more timestamps were added to it. So already, I'm hoping your minds are churning with ideas about how you could kind of get this set up to automatically scrape data. Oh, it wants me to refresh it. There's some more information. We can have it every minute, every second, every certain amount of time, re-scrape information and then write it to a file. And over the course of a day, you'll have a whole bunch of data accumulating in persistent storage for you to then review or use somewhere. Maybe in a future program, you want to import it back in and analyze it for trends of stocks, or maybe you want to kind of look through a summary of the headlines of the day, compare them from between different places or times. And there's all sorts of interesting stuff you can do with this because we've now interfaced or built into this the ability to have content autonomously and asynchronously called with these timers. So hopefully you can make sense of this new idea, at the very least get it up and running, and put it to great use into creating a really cool new piece of functionality in this upcoming project.